why is that?
So then you had set theory on that slide, and I didn't quite know how. I think that I was just coming in at that point. I don't know how the set theory.
I see your problem, and I was aware in drafting this up with like several leaps of analysis here to present that. But let's go into it. According to analytical philosophy, a concept is a collection of attributes. So if you want to have the concept of horse, you say, well, horse is a four-legged animal, and it's got 26 teeth, and big brown eyes and mane, or something like that. Well, you might add things that is used to do triathlons or racing or something like that. So your list of attributes is supposed to define the concept. And this is completely wrong and shallow. A human being, for example, cannot be defined by the list of attributes. Right? I mean, you try and do it in the total mix. A human being is a human being because they're part of a human society, and we've raised so. In fact, someone who is anatomically the same as a human being, who has all the attributes of a human being, who grows up in the wild, say a child that's been abandoned by an ancient society to maybe on their own, and all practice, it's not a human being. And they feel that because you recognise it, but it hasn't turned into a real human being. So the way analytical science equates set with concept. And what a set is, it's a collection of objects that share some attribute. So you've got all the little objects, like in the Vygotsky experiment. You've got the square blocks and the round circles and so on. And you say, well, make a concept out of this, and you get all the round ones that you colours together, and you say, I've got a concept. The child is spotted round. It's a concept. Not at all, but just determine the common attribute between. Right? Because under the understanding of concept of the dominant science at the time, to identify the common factor round in something is to make a concept. Many followers of Vygotsky think that during those experiments, children discover concepts in the true sense of the word. Right? Not true. Vygotsky says it over and over and over again, and people just don't see it. People think if a child can see, pick out round objects, which is developing their analytical perception, a necessary precursor to learning concepts, if they've got a concept. But a concept like we're talking about the Holy Trinity. I mean, exactly how you take the concept of the Holy Trinity in terms of its attributes. I mean, the idea that real concepts are like that. Concepts are something that can take decades or centuries to develop, and they represent insights into the solution of specific problems that arise in society, and not a collection of attributes. A collection of attributes, you can give it a name, Vygotsky calls it a pseudo-concept. At the stage of drawing for a young child, it's very concrete. They don't even say, well, it's all these things with blue on them or something. At a certain point, they actually think of a collection of objects. And at first won't be conscious of what it is that constitutes that group. Well, they will develop that. So that's why the circles are there. Why do I say this is our political system? Because they're saying that they're making this leap of faith that 40 million people can choose the government collectively by taking one person's vote, an opinion by one person on which they prefer over to, and then counting them up. It's what I call abstract general logic. So, for instance, if you consider the government as a movement, right? It's a movement of leadership of the whole country. So let's not be too subtle about this. Compare that with a trade union that has a national executive, regional executive, a branch executive, and members involved in different subcommittees and so on. So you've got this whole chain, and when decisions are made, they're actually debated out, made extensively at different levels, and then passed up the chain where again there's a huge debate about the rights and wrongs and conditions of that, and eventually you come up with a national that's a concrete universal concept, because the concept that comes out of the end, you know, what the union should do, is arrived at by bringing together, concretising all the opinions of the whole group that's involved. Right? The abstract general is different. So, for example, you have environmental movements where everybody pays $10 into the pool, and then that purchases some staff who lobby government to do the thing. Abstract general organisation again, because the movement is constituted by the willingness of someone to give $10. You actually have no say over what happens, there's no discussion about policy, you abdicate all that to some employed staff to make a living out of it. Abstract general. And if you look around the world, unfortunately, you know, all fast frozen relations being withered away by capitalism, branch-based organisations that produce their policies by concrete universal decision-making process are being pushed aside by abstract general processes, which are very good for the people at the top and often make very rational professional choices. I mean, a lot of these green lobby groups, the way they're run, I think, is so professional. That's because there's a money-raising issue, and you get people in leadership that are hired for their skill and their expertise and so on. So they can be very powerful. If they weren't very powerful, I suppose the branch-based structure wouldn't have disappeared. Likewise, I think the same kind of thing is happening in churches, certainly in America, whereby the gospel is delivered across television to a dumb audience sitting there soaking it up for many millions, and then there's money raising to maintain the man who has all the truth to continue to broadcast. And those little churches that have congregations that met every week or twice a week and discussed the scripture and their beliefs and input to church policy collectively, I believe, becoming fewer and fewer. They still exist. Insofar as the church is alive, they have these congregations. But increasingly, in conditions where capitalism, where the social fabric has been torn to shreds and atomised, you have an appropriate abstract general way of practicing religion. So it's not, I mean, I know that when this started happening in the unions, which meant transforming them into insurance societies, where the due was deducted by the union, due was deducted by the employer and paid directly to the union office, and then hired the staff. Right? In fact, then find what people really wanted was a kind of insurance company. That they would pay the due, not give insurance, get bad treatment by the employer, and not only that, they could give you deductions at various shops, and deductions on holidays, and give you a free dental plan, all this kind of thing, right? And a lot of unions were very upset about this. What are we doing wrong? Why aren't people coming to our branch meetings anymore? Well, and people would start, I mean, rightly question what they were doing. And I mean, the membership of the Australian Union, which was 44% of employees when I got back to Australia in 85, I mean, it's gone down to about 30% now. It's on the up again, because I think got a reasonably good leadership of the ACTU that's, you know, taken the bull by the horns, confronted the problems, and finding ways to beat it. Right? But the problem is that the unions thought that they were doing something wrong. The sense that they hadn't yet taken the right action. It wasn't caused by anything they were doing. This is all the effect of the commodification of all relations. Churches, unions, sports clubs, everything, all having the same thing happening. They were being transformed into abstract general forms of organisation, usually based on buying the benefits of membership and making no contribution to the services themselves and no participation in creating those services. People being transformed from active members of an organisation dedicated to some shared cause into purchasers of a service. Now, if that was all there was, it would be pointless giving this talk because we're all going down the curve at a great rate. But I mean, it's nice to do it in South Africa, with all countries who have a chance of turning the tide on that. But also the impending disaster in which this policy taking the world gives a chance to make people reconsider and think of approaches. Is there a question up there? No? Dominic, and then thank you.
know why you asked me about Toussaint. I think Toussaint is Dominique, by the way. Dominique.
Oh, right.
Toussaint l'ouverture, the opener.
Somehow we must have known.
But it's appropriate. I mean, I think you've nailed the question of is science and humanity totally, but you've opened up another possibility for this project, which is what to do after the withering away of the state. In other words, I'm saying that what you just said has a bit knocked my question back. I mean, it hasn't answered the question, but it's knocked it back because you could get the impression that one should be pessimistic about democracy, but in fact democracy isn't dying, and probably ought to die, actually, at some stage, and we have to consider that. We could do it much more enthusiastically if we realized its limitations, and if we could see another possibility of a fabric of society that would sustain itself without this means, which we can all see is thoroughly defective. Okay? As much as it's better than whatever was before it, nevertheless, there must be something, or it would be better if there's something we can see beyond it, so that we can do it with full force, knowing that we're not going to be trapped by it, and we can escape by it. And then that would be your collaborative project, pluriphenomenon. So is that what you're doing, Andy? Are you giving us a prescription for the road to communism?
In a sense, but of course I wouldn't be so arrogant, especially in light of what I just
Why not?
said. Because what I'm giving you is just a suggestion as to how you could look at things. But you can look at an institution not as an institution, but as a defective project. And I hope that if that idea catches on, then good things can follow. Since the achievement of a better society is a collaborative project, and you call all these things exactly, I can only hope to be accepted as a participant in that project. Now just but to indulge a little bit, to indulge. My personal view is that you can't abolish parliamentary elections. You have to make them redundant. And this applies to lots of things. You look at the movement going on today in North Africa, which I welcome enormously. It's the best thing that's happened in decades. It's what I've seen so far in the movement. But it's very clear that people in countries that don't have parliamentary democracy really want it. And in a sense, they're not to say, oh, well, here's the defects of parliamentary democracy. So what? We want that. Now, it's not to say that that's all they want, and that the various spontaneous forms of organisation that grow up in Tahrir Square, in a sense, they're already transcending it. But there remains great value in everyone casting their vote and counting them up and seeing something wrong. I don't think it's adequate as a form of rule, but I think as a kind of check, it's got a great value. At a certain point, it'll be redundant, because that would just be an interesting oddity. Yeah? That so many people would vote for this or vote for that. Because the kind of society that I'm envisaging with these images about fabric of society, yep, there we go. Oops, I forgot a factor. Okay, is that actually the rope is more true to what I want to say. Where's the rope? Yeah. A country is a project. Always is. Right? It starts off, it is a project. Right? But it's not understood generally as a project. It's understood as an abstraction category in or out of. Right? But creating a society and taking it somewhere is a project. Now, within that project, there are all sorts of smaller projects. It seems to me, once these projects have developed themselves in a healthy way, and understanding the norms of collaboration which apply to them is that very simple and very compelling. And projects collaborate with other projects. Then at a certain point, capping it off with the general election would be irrelevant. But you really have to get to a point where everyone really is a participant in the project in the country and really believes so. Because the kind of really fig leaf that parliamentary democracy gives you is people really want to keep that fig leaf until it's really redundant. So I'm sure, well, you might argue with some justice that it's a barrier, that parliamentary democracy causes some sort of barrier. But the fact is that we are nowhere strong enough to transcend it. We can look forward to it. We don't obsess over it. Well, I don't think we particularly won't be helpful to talk around abolishing it. We talk in general terms about transcending democracy, and I would prefer, I haven't used the word democracy all this time, have I? I find it's a confusing term, right? Whereas it actually has quite specific meanings. But I tend to not use it because it has so many different meanings. And it sounds like a good thing, but if it means what you've got in America, where every kind of backwardness and prejudice, mostly rules. In fact, the voting system in America makes it almost impossible to do anything progressive. But it would be much better. I mean, it's sort of why China can do things in America that haven't been done in a million years. Like China might do a lot of other things, but they can also do very progressive things. So they say, this is what we're going to do. And in a certain sense, benign dictatorship has. I remember I went to this conference and there was a fellow there from one of the green movements, and we were all talking about socialism and solving the environmental crisis. And if they were sort of the same thing, he said, look, if fascism could solve the environmental crisis, that would be a fascist. Now, we might know that fascism won't, but you can put it, democracy, under conditions when the media people are determining what people believe and think, and all the arguments of a political player are being directed given to the mass of voters, to the media, then democracy is really just a rule by the murder case, and in America's case and in Britain's case. Now, of course, the responsibility for seeing that isn't the case means to build organisations and projects that are meeting the responsibility of communication, not leaving them at the mercy of the brutal murder. So, there's a large reaction to scandals. Also, there's lots of charity work, gives art galleries to universities and all sorts of things. But so again, it's a question of you have to build what you're going to replace it with. You keep up the polemics. I don't know any day of the week why democracy, in the form popularly understood, means a decision by voting or something, produces systematically rotten decisions. Because people in this room are probably sensible enough to make up their mind on objective data. You're always outvoted by millions of people who got their information from media whose criteria of truth is what sells. So you can, I'll come to go, but you can overcome. Oh, sorry, yes, my friend.
I'm struggling to make sense of the problem. When here we had this discussion between humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences, it was immediately after the commission that was chaired by Walliston. It's a very difficult word called the Herkian Commission, which basically called for a sort of interdisciplinary approach from the humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences. But we are, I think, 10 years down the line from when that report came out. And the natural sciences and the paradigm is still dominant.
It's not simple.
And I was just trying to find out that all the interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, it has just given us many words, but we haven't been able to dislodge the strength of the positivism.
So I'm distracted by doing this when I was decided to get my campaign. Yes, this is the reality. Big answer. Now, interdisciplinary. Yeah, I was looking for the slide where I say concept is a name. And you can call up the flag post, the banner of interdisciplinary and change it up. Because what you have to do is you have to get real collaborative work happening, coming from the different disciplines, and make sure that people are obliged to work on projects in which it's a common understanding of what they're trying to do. Now, in time, if people are exposed to working in common objectives with other disciplines, you have some hope that some real interdisciplinary understanding might come out of it. Now, doubtless that happens from time to time. But like you say, natural science tends to dominate. One of the reasons that natural science tends to dominate, and there are many, is that they tend to command the money. They tend to command the money, natural science.
Yes.
People who are working in early childhood development have difficulty finding the 2 cents to rub together. But if you've found a medicine that will cure kids from their ADHD, then you've money thrown into to do the other thing is, of course, that science tends to be, because of it being based on the treatment of the object as something existing independently from it, it tends to move in that direction of the abstract general approach. And it requires some understanding to overcome that. Whereas, I mean, all sorts of atrocities happen within the human sciences, of course, so in place. But a lot of those atrocities are because of the attempt to emulate the natural sciences. And the attempt of human sciences to emulate natural sciences goes back hundreds of years. I mean, Descartes himself understood the human being as a hydraulic machine. So the very first conception of human consciousness was a hydraulic. And so it goes on all the way down. Now, because we have these wonderful MRI machines with big pictures of brains, and I hear that you've got a much better chance, statistically, a much better chance of getting your paper published if you've got a picture of the brain than if you haven't. So the developing of technology heavily determines the concept people have of a human being. So people, I mean, every time you turn on the radio or read an editorial on these topics, you find out that thinking is really the activity of neurons. And it proves it because it's stuck an MRI on you and you see there's something going on in this part of that part of the brain. And it amazes me, the people that cannot grasp the fact of consciousness being something different from the activity of neurons. But their consciousness can't give you pretty pictures. You can't justify the existence of a multi-million-dollar machine that's saying something about consciousness. But if you've got a $20 million loan off the government to buy an MRI machine, then we want to see some pretty pictures. And you will be a very eminent member of the department if you've got $20 million to get an MRI machine, than the person just working away trying to figure out how kids learn by talking to them and watching them learn. So there are all sorts of economic factors that make it difficult to bring the national scientists to the table to seriously collaborate with the people working in the community. Because as long as there's this huge imbalance of power, then you don't get genuine collaboration, therefore you can't get a genuine disciplinary project going. But of course there are exceptions, and all sorts of wonderful people working in natural sciences who are aware of these things and will genuinely do this disciplinary work.
question about Dominic's comment and your response to it sort of sent me in a somewhat different direction, but I still may get asked the question. Okay, the whole idea of transcendence of democracy, I don't know. I think from the point of the universe, the kind of more misanthropist view would probably be better. The sooner the human being goes out, the better, all considered. From the point of view of the universe.
How does the universe have a point of view other than to
Yeah,
us?
well, it's...
I'm a bit of a pantheist.
No, of course. I mean, you can't actually talk about the point of view.
Yeah, but we are the universe. We are the part of the universe that is thinking and reflecting on it.
Yeah, I think, well, I think the sooner we go up, the better. I think, I think we probably approached our sell-by date very fast when the first bright spark actually decided to come down from the tree, really. But anyway,
it's not a popular point of view.
No, I know. But this actually does in some weird way lead to the question where we talked about collaboration being the basic unit of a human society being a collaborative approach. Is it necessarily a human society? If you look at, say, sort of insect societies, they, in terms of collaboration, well, you might not want to call it collaboration, but cooperation. So if we go, and look at other societies, primate societies, where there is conflict, where you couldn't possibly talk just about mere cooperation.
Look, I would say no, basically, because, in a sense, bees can do what bees do. If I'm wrong on this, it's to the bees figure it out for themselves. But collaboration is derived from labour.
Yeah,
it's to work with. Yeah. So we have to question our concept of labour. Okay. And coming from the Marxist and Hegelian tradition, I'd say the precondition for a labour process to take place is the separation from nature. The very first instance of the labour process is delayed satisfaction. Right, what's that? Delayed satisfaction. Right? If for some reason or other I'm willing to walk over the hill to get the better nuts or whatever, then and my extra walk is like an elementary labour process. Now, of course, all these things are never sharp lines. I'm sure one can show me that some gorilla somewhere exercise delayed satisfaction. Follow that.
Well, they do.
But it's the little loop, right? The phenomenon out of which human beings arise is the separation from nature and the labour process intervening between the human being and nature, and then the mediation of that relation with nature through a community, and the mediation of the relation to the community through norms. I'm really heavily drawing on instrument that people will recognise, but so in a sense, you have to separate from nature, albeit you remain one of nature's own forces before all this gets going. Yeah? Now, what animals do what animals do by their nature. The human labour processes are acting for, I think, millions of years, though of course millions of years ago there weren't human beings, but they were the prototype, made human beings what they are through people changed themselves and created the languages we use, the tools, the building, changed the land under. And it's only this alteration of nature and the alteration of human beings which accompany it, which creates human beings, and therefore the labour process, this process of self-change through changing our environment, is the assumption behind talk of collaboration. So when bees have a fight over whether to take their honey from there to there, or whatever it might be, you may observe the similarity to collaboration, but I don't see the point of insisting on it being included. Now, for example, when I took commodity exchange and top-down command to be forms of collaboration, that might also seem to be in the same category of bending a concept as applying collaboration to a B. But the thing is that exchange and command can be transformed into genuine collaboration. And that's what makes it possible to incorporate all those things together in a single concept of collaboration that is either more or less distorted. Whereas I can't transform the activity of a bee into human-like activity with using languages and tools and laws. I mean, I don't think you'll find anywhere in the animal kingdom something like the laws you'll find in any human society, even those which are not. All human societies have a civil society with laws. Yeah? That are objectified in some way. Even Hegel said a law is not a law unless it's written down and people are able to see it. I might be wrong, but I don't think you'll find that in the animal kingdom. So, nothing against the animal kingdom, but I think that human life is something that's distinct. I think laws and norms as opposed to habits and collaboration is something that are peculiar human. And if that's shown somewhere to be not a black and white issue, that's fine. They're essentially human. They're essentially human, not just an essential attribute. I don't think I'll persuade you. It comes from the gut, it's like you're expressing. It's not something that's going to decide the rationale. I'm sure we'll be all fine. Russia.
And in that regard, I think Luneta Vygotsky makes a very interesting distinction between elementary mental functions, which we share with animals, and what he calls specifically human higher mental functions. And he always emphasizes that, specifically human. And I've always found that fascinating, how he emphasizes that, and he links it rightly to the act of labor, of work, etc., because it's out of that human nature for him actually emerges. But I was going to ask a completely different question.
I was nice to hear.
And you made an argument, quite a strong argument, how science in a sense needs to be humanized, right? By considering the notion of collaboration as this basic unit of analysis. Now, I want to pose two questions slightly differently. In the social sciences or humanities, does it mean that by taking collaboration as the unit of analysis, we necessarily secure the scientificity of what we do?
No. But I think that a genuine science can only arise on the basis of a clear concept of the subject. So if you wanted to talk to a science of social relations, and you didn't just accept that sociologists over the past 250 years or so, right, then you're doomed to failure in the critical light if you don't begin with the concept of a unit of social life which is adequate to the task. So Marx, for example, laboured many decades to select what he regarded as the unit of analysis for bourgeois society. Now, what we're trying to do is expand that word so that within the same continuity of understanding, we can understand also societies other than capitalist society by taking the commodity relation as one specific special case of collaboration. There is also command, and that produces social relations. They're also subject to analysis and understanding, and also collaboration and stuff. Now, Marx didn't go there because he made it his task to understand that the dynamic of capitalism is where it's leading. That doesn't bar us also from considering other types of collaboration. And the thing is, if you have this unit of analysis for the human phenomenon, then you get the concept, using the Hegel's term for it, of the thing. Now, to get that in the first place is like a leap. It's It's not harmony. Right? It's really to grasp it. There's no formula or practice you can use to tell you how to get the concept of something. But when it arises and you understand it, then by querying and investigating that relation, you can unfold from it what follows by necessity. Your analysis of the thing is constantly checked against by observation, but you can take some particular theorem or statement or phenomenon that's not in the science and show how it follows from the nature of the science. If you can't, it's not a science. I mean, a zoology that thought it was sufficient to list all the existing animals could not call itself a science. But when zoology uses the various insights into the relationship between different forms of animal life, it can, of course, prove the necessary existence of every different, the giraffe's got black and white stripes and not red and white. There's clearly contingency involved. So, and likewise with capital, you can't map out the development of capital for the next 100 years by the kind of approach that Marx used. But you can still bring out the necessity of what happens insofar as it is a necessity. So it's not a science unless you do that. Any science is not founded on a clear concept of a subject matter. It's simply not a science. It's just a job for the boys or the girls. But that's all there is to science. Right? Science also involves peer review, evidence, appointment on merit, because science is a practice. It's not just a concept, it's a practice. And as such, it refers to particular institutions in society which are founded on certain norms and principles. So one of those, not recognised by science, I would ask certainly my concept of science insofar as my goal should include have a clear concept of science. But at the moment, you can put in paper no concept that we're talking about and gets rid of peer review.
Can I ask a question in relation to my project? I got very excited by your idea of if you want to study forms of consciousness, then collaborative project is your unit of analysis. And I'm studying teachers' emotions in relation to assessment. So, and my question is, what can we learn about assessment if we take their emotions seriously? So I'm like 2/3 of the way through analyzing my data. And the one thing that I found was the thing that teachers feel really strongly about and that really concerns them is the issue of learner achievement. And then when I was thinking about your thing of project collaboration, I thought that actually learner achievement is the project that requires collaboration.
Between the teacher and the student.
Between the teacher and the student, and between the teacher and the department.
Look, one of the things I have to say about this stuff is there's never an easy answer. Understanding the concept of the problem always takes considerable studying and such. It's not an automatic way of getting it. So I can't answer your problem. But I would say that what you're dealing with a couple of intersecting projects here. The project of learning is one that is involved with the student and the teacher and the material to be learned. Now, of course, the materials we learn, the curriculum comes from outside. Neither of them choose what has to be learned. So it's already a subordinate part of the holistic culture. But then when you raise the question of assessment, then there's another character involved who's appointed through some process and who are subject to certain rules, who's intervening as an outsider, so to speak, in the relationship between the student and the teacher. And then you have to see that they've got their own agenda. They may or may not be interested in what the student wants. So, I mean, that's one relationship I see. teacher's emotional reaction to it. Vygotsky wrote a lot of emotion, but in my assessment of what he wrote, he hadn't yet really come to a conclusion. He was still a working document at the time. But other people who have been working on the Vygotskian theory of emotions have it something like this, that there are things that happen in the body, right, which happen because of your situation and your perception, but are beyond conscious control. If, for example, you get a tenseness in the stomach, and you go, why am I feeling tense? Then your intellect interprets that feeling. It's like something that's outside you. My heart's going like crazy. And the heart goes like crazy because very, like animal level, systems in the body are deciding that you need to get ready to run or do fight or do something. Right? But then you perceive the heart's racing, or you perceive different emotions, and the word emotion is generally not only in Vygotsky's writings, but in other biology about emotions, reserved for that visceral level. In fact, people talk about slugs having emotions, right? Because it has bodily reactions to things around it, withdrawal and excitement. It's not what makes us human. But then people reserve the word feeling for that intellectual interpretation of what's happening in your body. So, for instance, if you listen to a Moonlight Sonata and you go, wow, that's really nice, and it makes you feel romantic or something, then that's described as a feeling. And all your history that's developed from the culture and your specific experiences in the culture trains you how to interpret those emotions. Right? So, for example, if I'm getting a bit softer in my older age, but I can envision the time when I got a bad assessment. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, I'll get out of my classroom. Right? But then again, if I have different experiences or a bit more realistic about myself, I might be devastated, like getting a rejection letter when you submit something to the journal. And sometimes they elaborate. They give you a couple of pages while they complain. It's devastating, it's horrible. Right? So that variable is not like it's specifically human, but it varies from individual according to the cultural training of your feelings, which is how you interpret your emotions. So there's a fellow called Manfred Orlinsky that I'm drawing on to make this point. If you're dealing with emotions, I really recommend you to look at Manfred Orlinsky. And there'll be a special issue of MCA on the Vygotskian approach to emotion coming out maybe in the next month at Corporation.
Something special, sorry to interrupt. There's something special that we don't know why, that maths generates anxiety in a way in which other subjects don't generate. Yeah, I'm not. But maths anxiety is much more prevalent than even in the second language.
Well, it's been studied a lot. Yeah. You see, it's like people will always feel more emotional about. I took the emotion feeling thing the other way around, but they argue, so I don't really think of that as true. Whenever something is really important to you, then the emotions get much more intense. And so, because maths has got a lot of status, and because maths is seen as something that gives you access to university or gives you access to status, then there's much more emotion involved in it because people want that access.
But there may be more to it, right? That explanation is sort of sufficient, but I wouldn't be surprised if I found that it went beyond that.
It always goes beyond.
Yeah. Look, I don't know much about this topic.
I was just really, well, maybe I should come and speak to you because I want to know whether I can use your work to help me analyze my day.
Okay, what about 3:30 on Wednesday? B120 in whatever building that is.
B120.
Or get the phone number of Carol and sort it out. Dominic, sorry.
No, I'm really glad that Kai said what he said. Because I think, science and the humanities and everything else is the building of human beings, and the way they do it is in collaborative projects. We've made a total sale on that, to me. And then obviously, it follows, in my opinion. It seems to me that when you're in a collaborative project, you're alive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not, you're not.
Yes.
And then,
alive as a human being.
yeah, and then you have the choice. And Kai has made the choice and said, not only am I going to pull out of your project, which makes you die a little, but I want you all to die, actually. And that's a perfect expression of the contradiction, not a dichotomy, but there's a quotation from George Sand at the end of The Poverty of Philosophy, where she says, this is where it all comes to, the bloody struggle or obliteration.
Right.
You remember that?
No, you saying George Sand wrote a book of the same name as Marx's book, The Poverty of Philosophy?
No, he Marx, at the end of The Poverty of Philosophy, quotes George Sand.
Oh, right, I'm with you. Yeah,
Right?
I forget that.
You know who George Sand was?
Yes, yes, I know.
As a woman.
Yes.
Called herself George. Right?
Yeah.
But she says, this is where it comes to, and this is Marx's sort of first published book of Marxism, and Lenin quotes that to show that he meant revolutionary business, not evolutionary business of putting democracy slightly out of date, but a revolution.
You can remind what was the phrase? It was something like philosophy is only serious when it's ad hominem.
Oh, right. That'll do.
In the later 19th century, there was this sort of middle class thing of people making confessions, and there were all these sort of questions, like what's your favourite colour and all that kind of thing. And Marx recorded a couple of these, and what's your favourite activity? Fighting. He was that sort of person. Which is, he's alive. He didn't have a punch time. But he's talking about struggling for what you want to do.
Right, and then the struggle is between the humanists and the anti-humanists, and it's absolutely stark and clear.
Yeah.
And it's better off that we have it all out in the open. That's what's at stake, and then we can have a good old struggle about it. But we all know what we're about, which is...
I don't really think Kai is going to be able to make common cause with the anti-humanists that are running the show.
But the ecologists are... they're all like that. They all say, the human beings are wasting the universe, and the universe would be better off, and the universe is more important, would be better off without us. It's common as anything. It's normal. There's lots of it about.
Yeah.
And Kai has expressed
it's
it.
depression. It's depression. Yeah. You lose hope.
It's a fear, because to be a human being is tough, right? So it's a withdrawal from the challenge. And then because there is a challenge.